I would like to introduce Alex Brill, who's going to share some thoughts with us today. Alex is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He served as chief economist and policy director of the House Ways and Means Committee, and he served on the staff of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Alex has also been a Lewis O. Kelso Fellow at the Rutgers Institute. He has done really important economic research on employee ownership, and we're just delighted to have Alex here today to share with us his thoughts. Let's welcome Alex.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be able to lead off early in the morning here. I know there's a wonderful agenda here all day, and it's going to continue on. And we're going to hear a lot from practitioners, and from policymakers, and from experts who study the ESOP space. And I think there's going to be a lot for all of us to learn from each other and together during the day. I'll just speak for a few moments this morning, and I will speak about ESOPs, but I think it would be remiss not to make some acknowledgement of the world we're operating in since 12:01 this morning. Maureen said she didn't feel comfortable speculating about the stock market. I would agree that I don't know how much more it's going to go down before it goes up. But we are entering a new policy environment, and I think it's worth acknowledging and commenting on just briefly, because I think it is something that will have consequences for workers and for business owners, and for the size of the pie, which is something I'll talk about in a moment. And so when we think about employee ownership, and we think about ESOPs in particular, or other strategies at getting aligning incentives and encouraging workers to maximize their productivity and feel like they're part of something to the greatest extent possible, that's a strategy and agenda within a larger framework of public policy. And there are many policies that affect the well-being of workers, affect the well-being of businesses generally. And I want to be on the record to be clear that a strategy that raises costs for businesses is a strategy that doesn't promote the well-being of workers and doesn't promote the well-being of business owners. And so what we're entering is a period of time that we don't know if the duration of which, where large tariffs, over 100% on imports from China, and large tariffs from basically all of our trading partners around the world, are going to have significant consequences for our economy, and we've seen that in the last few days as trillions of dollars of equity values have evaporated, mostly to the 10% of people who own 90% of the stocks. So feel how you will about that fact. But when we think about where this will impact the economy, I mean, I think it'll impact our economy broadly, because our workers are also our consumers in this economy, of course. When we think about the particular industries that'll be affected, there are various industries that'll be affected depending on their degree of exposure to trade policies and trade in general. But we know that a lot of the ESOPs are sort of overweighted in the manufacturing industry. And we know that a lot of the rhetoric around the trade agenda that we're experiencing has to do with our manufacturing agenda, our manufacturing industry, a desire to kind of strengthen or bring back manufacturing into the United States. And I think a lot of that philosophy or that perspective is quite misguided. And it's easy to imagine a manufacturing business that relies, an existing manufacturing business here in the United States today that may rely on imports as an intermediary good, right? A component to what they manufacture may be a part that comes from overseas, maybe from Canada, maybe from China, maybe from Mexico, maybe elsewhere. And as those prices rise, this will hurt the production function at those manufacturing firms. Immediately, it will hurt the owners and it'll hurt the workers in those businesses. And so I make this point because the agenda of employee ownership and the agenda of ESOPs generally don't exist on an island by themselves, right? It is a policy within a broader set of policies, within a broader set of tax policies, and tariffs are certainly taxes. And so when we think about pursuing strategies that are good for workers and business owners, we need to think narrowly about the agenda of today, employee ownership policies specifically, but we should also be aware of the broader set of policies that can affect the well-being of workers, consumers, and business owners. And so this tariff policy, of course, like any policy, is one that is in the pursuit of a goal, right? We live at the moment still, luckily, in a democracy where we choose our leaders somehow, and they pursue goals on our behalf. And I'll just speak to two broad goals that policymakers often pursue and that are sort of related to the elements of employee ownership. So one of the policy goals that some policymakers pursue is the desire to, what I will call, rearrange the pie, right? To make adjustments to the contours of the existing economy, to reshape the existing economy. And another policy agenda that some policymakers pursue, we could call policies geared at growing the pie. And these two things are not mutually exclusive, although they involve trade-offs. And it can sometimes be harder to grow the pie if we're simultaneously also trying to rearrange the pie. That would be true if we were making an actual pie, and it's true for the economy as well. When we think about policies to rearrange the pie, there too, there's like many dimensions, or at least two that I can think of that we could think about in which ways we could rearrange the pie. And so sometimes we think about that as redistribution. We say that, too few people control too many of the assets or have too much of the income, or the disparity between the CEO and the entry-level worker is too great, or the increase in average wages for those at the top have changed at a different rate than the increase of average wages of those in the those who are at the median level. And we could say that that's okay or not okay, and we could try to twist and alter that redistribution. We can also try to rearrange the pie, not in an income redistribution sense, but we could just think about it from an industry's perspective. And in fact, I think we hear a lot of rhetoric today about the industries that we like versus the industries that we don't like. And so this takes us back a little bit to manufacturing. I think there's a lot of dialogue at the moment about the importance of manufacturing here, that we shouldn't manufacture elsewhere. It would be better if we manufactured here. In an economy of full employment, or virtually full employment, if we were to have more manufacturing activity, it probably would be rearranging the pie in some sense, and we would have less other activity. So we could be rearranging the pie by just simply putting our thumb on the scale for one industry over another. And again, that will come with costs. But we could endure those costs. We could subsidize those industries that we deem to be somehow better than other industries. That's not my view. I would rather the market sort out whether we should make something here or let someone else who has a comparative advantage make it somewhere else. I would prefer a world where we make the things or do the things that we're best at, whatever those things may be. And I have a preference to put more emphasis on the size of the pie, on policies that work to raise prosperity in the aggregate, and that such policies can allow everyone across the income distribution to be better off today than they were in the past. That doesn't mean there's not any role for redistribution at all. That in fact we have a very progressive tax code. We engage in a fair amount of income redistribution. But I'm more focused in my work, in my policy advocacy, and my research on strategies that work to grow the pie. And so this takes us back to the question of ESOPs, the reason that we're gathered here today. And one can say, well, what role do ESOPs have either in rearranging the pie or in growing the pie? And the common answer, I think, is yes, right? All of the above, right? This is a perfect solution that does everything anyone would want. If you're interested in rearranging the pie, we've got a policy for you. And if you're interested in growing the pie, we can actually do that at the same time. And I think that there's I think that there's truth to that. I think that the economic evidence around growing the pie for ESOPs is strong. There's evidence around the economic resilience of ESOP businesses, and more resilient businesses are less likely to take a dip when tariffs go to 100%, say, and are more likely to weather that storm and continue on growing instead of growing and contracting. And there's certainly is evidence of what I would call positive spillover effects of ESOPs in their community. And Maureen talked earlier in her opening remarks about the role of community, how workers feel in their community. But there's also the question of how these businesses perform within their community. And they tend to perform well and support their community generally. And so there is strong evidence that ESOPs can be a strategy, one strategy to help grow the pie. And of course, it is a strategy that can help rearrange the pie if that's someone's policy pursuit as well. But this kind of win-win strategy, win-win aspect of this policy, and here's where I'll close. I think it's important to be cautious about the free lunch or the win-win aspect here, because while it has led to a lot of bipartisan interest and support for employee ownership and for ESOPs and for other arrangements as well, we should also just recognize that there are policymakers who are broadly who sometimes have tensions with these two grow the pie, rearrange the pie strategies, right? It's not just that like, oh, this has one of the things that's important to me, therefore I'm going to grab onto this framework. Because some people really don't want to rearrange the pie, right? They don't want to be figuring out what the right industry is or what the next refundable tax credit should be. There are people here in this building who resist some of those objectives. And conversely, there are policymakers who resist the notion that the policy can have a large impact on the size of the pie. And so it's now, we should let evidence determine whether those things are true or not, and we should be honest about the costs of those. But we should also, I think, recognize that while there is something appealing in the employee ownership for everybody, there is also something that might rub some people the wrong way. And so navigating that pathway by trying to be bipartisan and inclusive and cooperative, but also recognizing that there may be trade-offs and that sometimes it's hard to grow the pie while you're rearranging the pie at the same time is an economic reality. And so with that, I'll stop, and I'll thank again Maureen and Joseph for putting this together and for giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts.